What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Alex, and in today's episode of Sorted, we will be performing a tune-up on the 2005 C55 AMG. Now, this isn't going to be a normal, traditional tune-up, as I've added in a couple items that you guys may not have thought about doing. But first, what even is a tune-up with modern-day cars? Back in the day, a tune-up referred to maintenance items that all shared the same service interval and affected the vehicle's performance. These items were almost all related to the engine and could include things like spark plugs, wires, points and condensers, cap and rotor, an air and fuel filter, and even valve lash and carburetor adjustments. Fast forward a few decades and electronic ignition and electronic fuel injection really starts to kill off the traditional tune-up. You may bundle together plugs and wires and possibly the air and fuel filter, but things started to become more a la carte and with their own separate service interval. Today, we are left with this. You have your spark plugs and you have your air filters, and that's about it. And these two items don't even share the same maintenance interval, so you can't even really call this a tune-up. Now, a lot of modern day cars, the C55 included, don't have a replaceable fuel filter, or let's put it this way, an easily serviceable fuel filter. The fuel filter on a lot of modern day cars is built into a fuel sending unit that is attached to the fuel tank, normally on top. And aside from being a very expensive part, it can be labor intensive to replace. And most people don't really consider replacing a fuel sending unit a practical maintenance item, myself included. I think for the C55, the part alone is like $300. So anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting that the term tune-up that we've all kind of grown up with is practically dead. Now, I do want to say a big thank you to FCP Euro. They provided me with all 16 spark plugs and the air filters. And you heard that right. This car does have 16 spark plugs. It has a really cool dual ignition system that they used on the 112 and 113 engines. And it provided a more efficient burn because there were two flame fronts. So FCP Euro does also include a lifetime warranty on maintenance parts that you're going to replace periodically, especially things like air filters. So you buy them once and you are done. We are going to start off with replacing all 16 spark plugs, which kind of sounds like a challenge on a car that wasn't ever really meant to have a V8, and they crammed one in it anyway. But as you guys are going to find out, this is actually a very easy job that you guys can do at home and save yourself a ton of money. To kick this party off, we need to remove the intake tubes from the air box, and then you gently pull up on that air box and it comes right off. We'll put it to the side for now and save it for later when we do the air filters. Here I'm using a pick to remove the connectors from each ignition coil. And guys, don't worry if you end up breaking one of these connectors like this one here. These things are so brittle, they just break off right away, and I never really have any issue with them staying in the coil after you go to put it together. Here I'm just simply removing the T30 bolts from each ignition coil, and when you do this, you want to use a magnet like this to remove the bolts. That way you don't lose them in the Bermuda Triangle depth of the engine compartment. From here, we are going to use these cool pliers to pull off each ignition coil wire, and if you want to be fancy, you can order this. This is the Mercedes-Benz specific tool that accomplishes the exact same thing, but I found that these cheapo pliers work perfectly fine. So you want to get these coils off and completely out of the way. That way you have full access to removing and reinstalling the spark plugs. Before you start ripping these spark plugs out, make sure to blow a little bit of shop air around them. That way you blow out any dirt and debris. So when you pull the plug out, it doesn't fall into the cylinder. If you don't have shop air, just get one of those little compressed air canisters that you use to clean out a keyboard. Now, I use a 3-inch extension and a normal spark plug socket to remove these, and you want to break them free with a manual ratchet at first, and then after that, you can use an air ratchet to kind of speed things up. Now, these spark plugs are actually pretty easy to do. You're going to use that 3-inch extension for most of them. The rear plugs, you're going to want to use a little swivel and a shorter extension to get to, but overall, very, very simple job. And just a fun little fact for you, as a young lad at the Mercedes-Benz dealership, I used to have parts replace races with my friends. So in this case, we would line up two cars with the exact same engine and race to see who could replace the spark plugs the quickest. Now, I could do this in about 20 minutes start to finish, but I had a friend who could do the entire job, both banks out the door in under 15 minutes. Keep in mind, guys, this job pays almost 3 hours book time. With the driver's side spark plugs removed, we can inspect their condition, but first, let me say this, the C55 ran perfectly. It even did 0 to 60, almost identical to what it did brand new, and I'll link the video down below where I test its 0 to 60. With that being said, the spark plugs are not in the best of condition. They're quite dirty. You can tell they have quite a bit of soot on them, and they just are generally in poor condition and definitely warrant replacement. Now, one thing that I cannot figure out, and I can't remember from back in my dealership days, are these the factory spark plugs from the C55? I remember that the factory spark plugs were stamped with this little Mercedes star, but I thought that they were Bosch spark plugs, and these are NGKs. So if you guys know the answer to that question, please comment down below. I'm very curious. Now, we are definitely going to be replacing these nasty spark plugs with these Bosch spark plugs, and instead of boring you with the installation of the spark plugs, which is basically the removal in reverse order, I'm just going to give you guys some helpful tips. My first tip is actually going to be a voiceover because I wanted to go into this a little bit more, and that is do not use any anti-seize on this style spark plug. Nowadays, if you have a spark plug where the threads kind of have like a chrome finish, they already have a protective coating to prevent rust and to prevent them from getting stuck in the cylinder head. Now, if you guys do use anti-seize on this style spark plug, you will be altering the torque specification. You'll make it easier to turn the plug, and therefore you may actually over torque the spark plug and possibly damage the threads. Now, if you have a spark plug that has a black finish on the threads, then you can use a little bit of anti-seize, but don't go nuts here. A little bit goes a long way. One more thing that I like to do with the spark plugs is I like to thread them in by hand by like 4 or 5 threads first. Then I use my air ratchet to kind of zip them in there, but I never tighten it with the air ratchet. I always tighten it by hand with a manual ratchet and preferably a torque wrench, and I will leave torque specifications down below. Lastly, for the ignition system, we have the ignition wires. Now, this is a great item to replace as a part of a maintenance, but you can also test them to see if they're bad in case you want to save a little bit of money, and that just requires a simple voltmeter, and you're going to be testing the ohms, and the specification is actually stamped right on the metal boot. It's 2K ohms in this case, and all of mine checked out perfectly, and ironically, FCP Euro sells a tune-up kit that includes the spark plugs, the spark plug wires, and the air filter, so definitely check that out in the description box as well. We're going to zip through the air filter replacement. It's super easy. It's just 4 T25 Torx. Look at how dirty this air filter is. Then I just blow out the air box. I clean it up as best as possible, and then I simply reinstall the air filter in reverse order. Very, very easy. First up in Alex's add-on tune-up type of items would be cleaning out the mass airflow sensor. This is an excellent service to perform periodically, as a cleaner mass airflow sensor will report more accurate data back to your engine's computer, resulting in better performance and better fuel economy. Also, if you think your mass airflow sensor is bad, try cleaning it out first, as half the time that totally fixes the issue. Now, see that clip sitting on the intake manifold? That can get brittle and break as well, so sometimes you might need to replace that. With the mass airflow sensor removed, we are going to get to cleaning it with this, a mass airflow sensor cleaner. And guys, don't use brake clean or anything like that on your mass airflow sensor. Just buy the real deal. I'll link it down below. This part is super easy. If you want, you can remove these 2 tamper-proof Torx and remove the actual sensor out of the housing. But in this case, we can clearly get to the sensing elements of the sensor here, those wires in there. And this is very simple. The directions say to spray this on the element for about 15 seconds. And we're just going to go like that. Okay, pretend that's for 15 seconds. And we are done. Now we're going to let this sensor air dry, and those are going to be perfectly clean, and they're going to report back a very accurate reading to your ECU. So let's move on. Next, we're going to be checking out the EGR tube. Next up, we have this, the EGR valve tube. That is your EGR valve, and it goes to the back side of the intake manifold. Now, this tube can become clogged like this one, and at this point, there is no flow going on in this tube, and you are going to get a check engine light. But before it gets so bad, so severely clogged,
it can begin to cause issues that may not set a check engine light, like a rough running or possibly lack of performance. So this is why I like to clean this tube out periodically as kind of like a maintenance item. And you can just simply clean out the tube and save yourself a bunch of money, making this a free service. Now, I'll admit this is a little bit harder than cleaning out the mass airflow sensor. You have to loosen and remove this bracket. It's just an inverted Torx bolt here and one down there. And then this is a 24 millimeter nut. So you're gonna use a wrench on here, and this can be frozen on there. So you're gonna wanna use some PB Blaster or some heat. Remove this nut, and then before you remove the two inverted Torx bolts right here to take it off of the back of the intake manifold, you can just kind of flip this up. It has a flexible section here, and inspect. If it's clean, just put it right back on. You don't need to replace any gaskets or anything, and you are done. If not, remove the tube. It takes, 20 minutes, and then clean it out with some brake cleaner or in a parts washer and reinstall it, and you're good to go.
And so that is my version of a modern day tune-up. Now, something I want to clarify with all of you guys, in case you saw a previous video that I made on the two most oversold services, unnecessary services. I made a video on that. Check it out, description box down below as usual. In that video, I stressed the fact that you should really just follow what's in your owner's manual and call it a day. Some shops will try to sell you services that are not in the owner's manual, which is exactly what I'm showing you in this video. So I just want to clarify, that previous video was of people getting ripped off, paying many hundreds of dollars for services that they straight up did not need. In this video, this is meant for the DIY guy. These are two things that are totally free to do outside of a $9 can of mass airflow sensor cleaning. So a little bit different situation. These will only take your time, and as an enthusiast, this kind of stuff is actually kind of fun. And again, it won't cost you really anything at all. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to wrap up everything on the C55 and get out of here. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, share the video. That kind of stuff actually really helps me out. Next up, I think we're going to be moving back to some cosmetics on this car, and if you guys missed the video of me restoring this headlight with ceramic coating, definitely check that out as well. If you're new, consider subscribing. If you've been around for a while, thank you so much for all the support. I hope that everybody has an awesome day, and I'll see you all in the next video.